At 30,000 feet in the sky, passengers thought it would be an ordinary flight. The engines hummed steadily, drinks were being served, and a black woman sat quietly dozing against the window. No one knew her life carried a secret powerful enough to change everything. Suddenly turbulence shook the plane, alarms blared, and the captain's trembling voice pierced through the cabin. "Is there any fighter pilot on board?" The passengers froze, hearts racing. Certain disaster loomed. What happened next stunned everyone and revealed the shocking truth about the woman no one expected. The flight had taken off smoothly from New York, bound for Los Angeles, filled with businessmen tapping on laptops, families juggling restless kids, and travelers hoping for a peaceful ride. Among them was a black woman in her mid-30s, dressed modestly, her natural curls tucked beneath a simple scarf. She carried herself quietly, blending into the rows of strangers who never gave her more than a passing glance. To them she was just another passenger, ordinary, unremarkable, but the truth was far from ordinary. Beneath her calm demeanor, she carried scars of battles no one could see. She had served her country in silence, a decorated fighter pilot who had once flown missions most people could never imagine. Yet here she was anonymous, invisible, just a tired traveler leaning against the window, drifting into sleep. As the hours ticked on, whispers of turbulence began to stir. A strange rattling noise echoed from the engines, drawing anxious glances across the cabin. A few passengers nervously tightened their seatbelts, but most shrugged it off, trusting the pilots in the cockpit. The woman's eyes opened slightly, her instincts sharp, her mind conditioned to notice details others would miss. She scanned the cabin, feeling a subtle shift in atmosphere. Something was wrong. Then came the announcement. The captain's strained voice trembled through the intercom, unlike anything they'd heard before. Gasps spread like wildfire as he confessed there was a critical emergency, and in a voice filled with fear, he asked the unthinkable, "Is there any fighter pilot on board?" At that moment the woman knew. Her quiet anonymity was over. The cabin descended into chaos. Nervous whispers turned to frantic voices as passengers exchanged worried looks. Some clutched the armrests, others reached for their phones, though no signal could reach from 30,000 feet in the air. Flight attendants hurried through the aisles, their reassuring smiles faltering under the weight of their own fear. The black woman remained still, her heart steady. Years of military training kicked in, drowning out the noise around her. She rose from her seat quietly, her every movement deliberate, her eyes locked on the cockpit door. Heads turned. For the first time, the passengers who had ignored her presence now followed her with desperate hope. She could feel the judgment in their eyes, some still doubting, others silently pleading. A man in a business suit scoffed, whispering under his breath, but his words were drowned out by the panic swelling in the cabin. None of that mattered. She wasn't here to be seen, liked, or validated. She was here because lives were at stake. When she reached the cockpit, the captain stood pale and trembling, sweat streaking down his forehead. The co-pilot was frantically flipping through emergency manuals, his hands shaking so badly the pages tore. The smell of burning wires drifted into the narrow space, and warning alarms screamed through the controls. The captain's eyes widened when she introduced herself, not as a passenger, but as a former Air Force fighter pilot. For a moment, disbelief flickered across his face. Could this woman, someone the passengers barely noticed, be the only one who stood between them and disaster? She slid into the co-pilot's chair without hesitation, her hands moving instinctively across the controls. The console lit up in angry red, systems failing one after another. She read the data, her brain processing at lightning speed, piecing together a survival strategy. Behind her, the murmurs of the crew and passengers filtered through. Some doubted, some prayed, some cried, but none of them could deny the shift in the atmosphere. For the first time since the announcement, there was a spark of hope. Her voice was steady, commanding, cutting through the panic like steel. She gave precise instructions to the captain and crew, her confidence unshaken, even as the aircraft groaned and trembled against the storm outside. Every second counted. Every decision meant the difference between life and death, and as lightning streaked across the windows, illuminating the fear on every face in the cabin, one truth became clear. The woman they had overlooked, judged and dismissed, was the only one capable of saving them all. The storm outside unleashed its fury, battering the aircraft with violent turbulence. Oxygen masks dangled, swaying wildly as passengers screamed and clung to one another. The black woman's grip on the controls was iron steady, though every bone in her body felt the strain of the fight. A sharp warning alarm shrieked. A critical engine was failing. The captain froze, panic etched on his face, but she didn't flinch. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Calm,
sharp, decisive. She rerouted power with a speed that stunned the crew, her hands dancing across switches and levers in perfect rhythm. The plane dipped violently, throwing passengers against their belts. Gasps and cries filled the cabin. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the jet would spiral into the darkness below, but with every ounce of strength and every lesson etched into her muscle memory, she fought back, pulling the aircraft into a fragile balance against the storm. Lightning flashed, blinding white across the windows, as if the heavens themselves were testing her resolve. Sweat dripped down her brow, but her focus never wavered. Years ago she had flown combat missions under enemy fire, but this, saving hundreds of innocent souls who had once dismissed her, was the fight that defined her. A violent downdraft slammed the aircraft, the nose tipping dangerously downward. Heartbeats skipped across the cabin. In that split second, she made an impossible maneuver, pushing the limits of the jet beyond its design. Metal groaned, alarms blared, but the descent slowed. Silence fell, broken only by ragged breaths. Against every odd, the plane leveled out. The passengers, who had once doubted her worth, now sat in stunned awe, realizing who had truly carried them through the storm. The woman didn't smile, didn't seek validation. She kept her hands firm on the controls, guiding the jet toward safety, knowing the fight wasn't over yet. The storm eventually eased, leaving behind an eerie quiet as the jet sliced through calmer skies. Passengers sat frozen, many with tears streaming down their faces, still clinging to armrests, as if letting go might undo the miracle they had just witnessed. In the cockpit, the black woman kept her composure. Her hands remained steady on the controls, guiding the aircraft toward the nearest safe runway. Behind her, the captain exhaled shakily, his pride shattered, his fear exposed. The crew exchanged silent glances, each one fully aware that the person they had overlooked, the woman they had doubted, had just saved every single life on board. As the wheels screeched against the runway, and the jet rolled to a safe stop, the cabin erupted into sobs and gasps of relief. Yet it was not the captain's name the passengers whispered. It was hers, the woman who had stepped forward when courage was needed most, the woman who had carried hundreds of lives through the jaws of death. When the doors opened and passengers stepped into the terminal, many found themselves unable to look her in the eye, not out of shame alone, but out of reverence. They had mocked, doubted, and underestimated her, and she had repaid them with salvation. The captain, pale and trembling, approached her quietly, his voice breaking. There were no excuses left, no arrogance to hide behind. Just two words, whispered with raw honesty: "Thank you." But she didn't linger for applause. She walked calmly into the crowd, disappearing like a shadow, as if she hadn't just rewritten the meaning of bravery. For her, the victory was not recognition. It was knowing she had lived her truth, even in the face of prejudice. News spread like wildfire. Headlines didn't just read about a plane saved in the storm, they carried her name, her story, her resilience. Across the nation, people saw her not as the stereotype they had once placed upon her, but as the fighter, the protector, the leader she had always been. And perhaps for even one child watching, one who had been told they were less than because of the color of their skin, it planted a seed, a reminder that greatness cannot be dimmed by bias, nor erased by hate, because when life demanded courage, it wasn't privilege, rank, or title that saved the day. It was the strength of a black woman who refused to bow to prejudice. So ask yourself, when the storms of life strike, will you cling to judgment, or will you have the vision to see the hero standing right in front of you?